As training camp approaches, we'll be reviewing several players' performances in the 2023 season and discussing how they could impact the Eagles during the 2024 season. Today, we'll be discussing Darius Slay. Today, we're going to be talking about Darius Slay. The 33-year-old former All-Pro still has the chops to be a good corner in the league, but let's see how his 2023 season turned out and see what's in store for him in 2024. Looking back to last season, he still displayed high-end athletic traits. He was a high-end athlete coming out of college, so that has helped serve him well as he has aged. And that's part of the reason he has aged a little bit better than Bradbury, as he was just a better athlete coming out. So as he starts to lose his step, he had more steps to lose than Bradbury. But on top of that, he also had, or he still has, really quick feet and really good mobility. And that really helps him change directions and open his hips and run with receivers. He still has good enough long speed to keep up with most receivers in the league, but I wouldn't say he has, he definitely doesn't have elite long speed anymore, but good enough long speed to track with most receivers down the field. And I think that's going to be something that we really need to pay attention to going into next season, because once you start to lose your speed at corner, it really starts to go downhill quickly and it's hard to play the position. Now, as we look at his play, at this point in time, I think he's probably a better number 2 corner than he is a lockdown number 1 corner. So that is something that's going to be important as we look at him going forward. But the reason he's been able to age so well has been a large part due to his experience and his IQ. And combined with his change of direction ability, it's allowed him to be a good zone corner, which is going to be important in Fangio's scheme. In addition to that, in man coverage, he still is pretty sticky, staying with receivers. And so much so that he really was tasked with shadowing a lot of the opposing team's number 1 receivers last season. So that's part of the reason why when you look at his metrics, they're a little bit modest compared to what I thought was a pretty good season from Slay overall. His yards per target was 55th, his explosive play rate was 69th, his completion percentage was 61st out of the top 150 corners and coverage snaps last season. His forced incompletion rate was 31st, so he's still making plays on the ball, and he had 2 interceptions as well. And he's had 2 interceptions in 9 of his 11 seasons in the league. So despite not being, maybe one of the better corners in the league I still think he is a good number 2 corner in the league, and I think he has a lot to contribute for the Eagles. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I think he's definitely still a good corner. This offseason, we are obviously scouting a ton of corners coming out of college, and one of the guys we looked at was Kool-Aid. And I, ironically enough, thought that current Darius Slay at his age is almost identical as a player to Kool-Aid, where he doesn't have the elite athleticism to basically let players gain separation and then use recovery speed to consistently make up that ground. So he has to stay in good positioning, but at like Kool-Aid, he has very good IQ, and he's shown the ability to mirror players from pretty much his whole career. Now, going into a zone scheme, they've played it the last several years, and we've seen Slay transitions well to that style of play. If my memory serves me correct, the Lions were running heavily man coverage, and that's kind of where he kind of rose to popularity. So that's been great. Now, visibly, you could see a drop-off last year in terms of that top gear, because before that, for my money, this guy was basically lightning in a bottle out on the field. He could run with any receiver, even like Tyreek Hill, down the field. That's no longer the case. So given that, he's really got to stay vigilant snap to snap, where he's not kind of getting too relaxed or losing focus of his assignment, because he doesn't have that elite athleticism to just spring into the play if he's beat. So he's certainly capable of that. Now, one thing that should be mentioning is he had a arthroscopic knee surgery last season. He missed several games. To my understanding, it had affected him for several weeks leading up to that. And he's made comments this offseason that he's like, oh, my knee's fully ready to go. I'm beating the young guns in races. So perhaps he does have a little more juice than what we saw in the field last year, and if he does, that would be great. Um, so that's my overall sentiment. I think he's a very solid corner. I think cornerback two is a great way to put it. If he's your cornerback two, you're in a good spot. If he's your top dog, and in the modern NFL, you're not often asking your top corner to travel with the other team's best receiver, especially as they like to move them into the slot often and switch sides. But they did do that last year. Part of the reason, in my opinion, is because they knew Bradbury was such a liability. So you get him on, I mean, there's just like an endless supply of terrific receivers out there. So it was almost by necessity they had to do that. I expect way less of that this year, because whoever is opposite him is going to be highly athletic. All the options they have to pick from are highly athletic. So curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, you brought up a number of good points there, a number of talking points to discuss as well that I want to get into. So, like you said with Slay, he kind of got pushed into that role where he did have to shadow people last year. Like I touched on, that's part of the reason why his metrics were a little bit down. I just don't think he is that shutdown guy anymore, and I think most people realize that. But it's the good thing with Fangio is he doesn't ask his corners to travel with top guys, at least not a ton. He really uses his coverage tools to try and take away the top options. So that's one way that he's able to help out his corners. Now, I mean, you remember last year, like you said, with Bradbury, couldn't cover anyone. Brooks was playing out of position in the slot, and we were dealing with a ton of injuries there. It became a thing where Slay had to travel with guys inside. I think we see a bounce back in him this year, and where he can play on the outside. He's not always having to travel with, whether it was Stephon Diggs, CeeDee Lamb. He was matched up with Brandon Ayuk a lot. He was being moved all over the field. So I think it'll be nice for him to get back to positions where he has a little bit more help. And when he is playing in these zone coverages, a lot of times they turn into man, but he's able to leverage different zone defenders in a way where you kind of don't get as much freedom in man coverage. Now, on top of that, you mentioned his Top Gear and the knee surgery. I think that is something that's very important to watch. He's been a very good athlete at this point in time, but guys really start to age. He's going to be 33 years old, and then you start adding in things like surgeries that you start to see guys really start to decline at that point in time. I don't know if it was a major knee surgery, but a surgery, and especially a surgery at 33, it's not of any kind. Generally, it at least diminishes your athleticism and your ability to train for your sport as opposed to train to recover. So there's that. So maybe he does decline a little bit more. And I think a couple of plays last year showed that his athleticism was declining a little bit. There was a play against the Cowboys where CeeDee Lamb, they're matched up and press one-on-one on the outside. CeeDee Lamb just gets a step on him, and Slay has to grab a little bit to recover. No flag was thrown, so don't really notice it too much. But you kind of see those plays where he just doesn't keep up with the top guys quite as well as he used to, or he doesn't recover quite as quickly as he used to. And then there was a play against the Commanders where it was no fault of his own, but the run ends up bouncing outside, and he's trying to chase the run, and you can just see him. He has to run on an angle, and you can just see him not able to catch up on the run with Brian Robinson down the sideline. So just a couple of examples of plays where he is slipping. You can just see him slipping just a little bit. But will he start? I think he does, probably. I mean, he's going to be a veteran presence. He understands defenses. He can communicate across the board. He's a trusted player, and it's important when the opposite corner might be a rookie. So I think for those reasons, it's just very likely that Slay's going to start. Even if a number of guys are showing out, I think he's the odds-on favorite to be a starter. But who knows? I think there's a scenario where you can see him taking a step back. One of the young guys that they drafted might step up. I think everyone assumes that Mitchell is going to be the outside guy, but who knows? Maybe DeJean's the better guy on the outside. We'll let that play out. But on top of that, Rodgers has been good in the NFL. He's balling out in camp. Keely Ringo is another year older. He flashed last year. He's been balling out in OTAs. There's no pads on, so take it with a grain of salt. But There's scenarios where maybe he does end up getting beat out and you let the best players play, but I do think he's a guy that, unless he drastically takes a step back, it's probably going to be starting.
Yeah, I'd say this. I'd say pretty much 99% chance week one. But like you said, if they're in the playoff hunt and it's week 12 and he's getting cooked every time, I think he comes out of the game. He's going to be given every opportunity to start just because he has probably has more experience combined across all the other corners. And I'm sure Fangio appreciates that. And I do think he has a good football IQ. So someone's going to have to be, you want a player who's in the room outside of the coaches to hold some of the other guys accountable. I think it means a little bit more coming from a teammate than a coach. Or not that it means more, but it can hold a little bit more weight for the person who's hearing it. And so I expect Slay to be a leader in that sense. And from the reports coming out, it sounds like he is embracing that role. So I'm not worried that he'll have like a Bradbury like fall off. He just, the way he's wired, he's a lot more spry player who's just more athletically gifted. And even if it does diminish a little bit, I think he just has enough of a knack for the position to make up for that. Now, I'm definitely concerned about him, and I have been for a long time, about like open field tackling. There's times where, and this is one of the things, once again, we talked about with Kool-Aid, where they'll either willingly get blocked or they're a little bit shy and they won't wrap up. They'll try to shove people out of bounds. Many people say that it's overblown, and a lot of the guys they brought in, like, for example, DeJean is considered to be a good tackler. So if he's playing in the slot, that can help out with that a little bit. But that's something that could go south because by all accounts, Bradbury was a very solid tackler for most of his career, and then it just went away last year. So it's like, I understand that his legs just could have been completely cooked, but for his tackling ability to completely vanish was suspect to me. And in that sense, I think, Slay's never going to be a guy flying up and blowing up screens. Now, he will make the occasional highlight play, like in run defense or on a screen. It's just not consistent. Now, here's something I noticed watching him, tape from last year, was it seemed like he knew they were going to target either Bradbury, whoever the slot corner was, or one of the linebackers often. So he'd kind of coast through the snap. The quarterback would never even intimate like he was going to throw to his side, and it was fine. And then there were times where the receiver would come out of his, like, off the ball, like a bat out of hell, and Slay would realize that, oh, this guy might be like the intended target, and he would be like way more locked in on those snaps and had a couple good plays on the ball. You could see that specifically in the Bills game. So it's there in flashes. One of the things that I've heard through the grapevine is that he may not get the full allotment of snaps. So even if he does start, they might rotate him out for a few series to get a breather, and they have so much depth that they can make it work. I'm totally open to that. Now, we've talked about this previously. Because there's so much communication required, checks at the line in the Fangio style defense, I'm skeptical about having this giant rotation of defensive backs where they're playing different positions, one drive to the other, they're switching out outside corners. I'm skeptical that you could have very seamless communication with that many moving parts. So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the last point first. I don't as far as rotating, I don't think they're gonna rotate outside corners, and the fact of taking those guys off the field, or I should say top corners. When you're trying to win football games, you're playing your top guys. They're not rotate, especially at corner. It's not a position where you rotate guys like defensive line. So I don't think they're going to rotate too much. But looking at some of your other points, is he the best tackler ever? No. And when I was going through and looking back and watching film again of last season, it's just night and day difference. Like a lot of times, Bradbury got blamed for a lot of the his coverage issues, but I don't know. Even worse might have been his tackling issues or his run and screen support issues. He just was giving up a lot of extra yards or leakage, where he just wasn't coming up, where he was not condensing space, and then when he is taking on blockers, he's taking on blockers way down the field. I don't want to make this a whole talk about Bradbury because this is a Slay conversation, but I thought Slay was a little bit better than that. I thought Slay got into a few plays. He was much more willing to crack replace. He had, like you said, a couple highlight plays, but I thought he was more willing. Now, I thought he missed some tackles, but overall, I don't take Slay for a guy as not wanting to make contact or take on contact when he has to. Now, is he a DeJean type player or a Sidney Brown type player? No, but there's not a lot of corners that you're going to find that or that. But when you looked at the way Bradbury is tackling compared to Slay, I was like, holy shit, we got to get this guy off the field. Not even just for his coverage, like just his run stopping. But you mentioned, sometimes he'd be a little like almost lackadaisical, or he would just be nonchalant about stuff. There's a few plays throughout the year where it's like it's that kind of stuff where it's like he's just like kind of coasting a little bit, then it's like, oh shit, they just threw it to my guy. Happened in the Commanders game a couple times. It appeared. I don't know what's happening, especially in like big moments in that game, like third down, late in the fourth quarter, or overtime moments. But it's like the issues that I have with him are things like that. His communication on bunches and stacks, or like he'll gamble because he is an intelligent player. So he'll try and jump routes or read routes and leverage throws, or he'll get his eyes back to the quarterback early. But those are kind of things where, like, those are mistakes that young players kind of make. But he's an older player. That's my bigger issue with things. Like he's not. It's not like he's not a good coverage player. He can still cover. He still has athleticism and ability to do that. But it's like, if he's going to make rookie player mistakes, should he be playing instead of younger players? I mean, I think that's a conversation or a question we'll have to see as the season goes on. And like you said, if he's taking a step back and it's week 12 and he's not covering, just like Bradbury wasn't covering last year, we're going to be having these conversations again. Is he rotating or not? But yeah. I think overall, I think Slay is probably going to be a starter. I anticipate he's going to be still a pretty good player. If not, he's not going to be a shutdown player, but I still anticipate Slay being a good corner for the Eagles next season.